questions. There are no public questions that I've been aware of. Item number 5 is the standing item, the update from scrutiny, and I invite the Chairman of Scrutiny, Councillor Finch, to address the meeting. Thank you, Councillor Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. I have circulated a brief report. We've met 3 times since the last Cabinet meeting, and on that report you see the subjects. I only want us to highlight, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just a few what I see as particularly important recommendations, stroke messages of these meetings, and they were pretty intensive of meetings themselves. Clearly, since that time, in terms of the Education Scrutiny Committee, they certainly welcomed the feedback from the Director of Children and Young People Services on the Ofsted inspection, and that is very much in their radar for future attention to assist the Cabinet and the people of Suffolk to move the objective of raising the bar, and that's highlighted in there. Looking at those other education methods other than at school, which is all about concern about the children who are excluded, I'd like to draw your attention particularly to paragraphs 4C and 4D, and to ensure that we actually not only make sure our resources are appropriate for the excluded children, but also potential excluded children, so emphasising on prevention rather than on cure. And I think it's fair to say that we should also make an extra effort to try and learn from those schools that do have a low number of those children that are excluded, to see what they're doing differently compared with those that don't enjoy such good figures. Moving on to the meeting we had, Read the Energy from Waste project. I think it's fair to say that probably we were delighted with what we've seen in that progress. We recommended to scrutinise it at the beginning of our session because it's such an important project. It's such an important project to this council over the next 25 years. And we wanted to, in fact, the recommendation on 7A does actually congratulate the whole team. The scrutiny team did go for a visit to the site and were very impressed with that team and the project directors. I would like to highlight recommendations B and C to ensure that as that site develops, the benefits of that site and the associate sites in terms of those being developed by CETA that develops, actually make sure that we do have appropriate recompense to the people of Suffolk, because that's what that site has done. The people of Suffolk have put the money in, and as a result of that, these subsidiary sites are going to be there. The other area I'd like to highlight is, or two others, sorry. One is actually to look at the rail network. We feel there's still the opportunity to consider and put pressure on the rail networks to actually improve that, so where possible some of that waste into that site can be brought by rail. And finally, we did have a number of witnesses in terms of that, and whilst we are very aware that the number of traffic movements coming in and out of that new site are not dissimilar to that which was happening before when it was a Suffolk County Council highways base, we had discussions with the Parish Council. The whole area has actually developed in terms of a transport hub, if you like, for a number of businesses. And indeed, the type of vehicle that is going into that site now, compared with what was using it before, being very often double trailers, does actually have quite an impact on that. So we've highlighted to highways that they should be liaison with the Parish Council to keep those options of how we handle that traffic under review. And finally, Mr. Chairman, our health scrutiny met on the 22nd of January, only this last Friday, at which I actually did sit as a substitute. I'd like to start by paying particular tribute to Tony Goldson as chairman of this. It is a highly complex subject, health scrutiny, and there was a lot of detailed debate handling across. We were represented in terms of that by 3 county councillors. I'd like to highlight paragraph D and E, which is 9D and E. Basically, if you read that thing, to expressed by a member of the community, people experiencing mental health issues may end up in the criminal justice system. And it's really highlighting that perhaps they were there where they were because of that, and what we can do to try and actually do more prevention under that subject. And I know under Councillor Spicer, the role of the Health and Wellbeing Board and taking it system-wide is being approached anyway. And then finally, in terms of the second part of that meeting, looking at the report from the Suffolk Communities Healthcare, and there was a lot of interest in terms of the services that are being delivered by our contractor, Serco. And I would ask you to kind of review those recommendations of that meeting quite carefully. May I just conclude? I'm not saying that the delivery section thing is not important. It is, because I've had quite detailed discussions with Councillor Murray. But I'd like to kind of conclude by saying two things. First of all, the budget paper today. As you know, we scrutinised that in 2 meetings, and they've been recommendations, and the responses have been well documented, and I thank you for listening to those comments. And then, final, and I'd like to thank Councillor Spicer, who's been on our committee now since the beginning of my session. Her role is always valuable, and I would say that she's a lady that has an enormous amount of energy, but I think she has now even got more responsibilities in your Health and Wellbeing Board, plus all your other roles, and I'm delighted to welcome Jessica Fleming to replace her. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. And please do, you don't need to stand. Members don't need to stand at Cabinet meetings, so you're very you're welcome to sit. Now, are there any questions or comments, first of all, from members of Cabinet on the scrutiny report? Yes, Councillor Newman.
Yes, to say that I note the Chairman of Scrutiny's comments concerning rail access to Energy for Waste plant, and we will look into that, prepare a report for the Scrutiny Committee.
And other members of the Council present? There is a microphone here. If anyone isn't near a microphone, I see Councillor McGregor is near a microphone, so I'll call him first, and then Councillor Hall.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. On page 3, I was just wondering about the redesign of the mental health services. As we know, Norfolk and Suffolk combined some time ago. I saw a recent press report which suggested that Norfolk County Council is proposing to take over that service completely. So concerned they are about it. I'm just wondering whether those reports are accurate, and if so, what role is there in place for Suffolk County Council in this particular matter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I don't think there's any truth in that. I sit on the board of governors of Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust, and although there is a lot of press speculation about the state of the mental health services, I can certainly say from a Suffolk viewpoint, things are under very reasonable control and scrutiny.
Thank you, Councillor Alton, and then Councillor Field.
Thank you very much. Obviously, I'm delighted that we managed to get the AOTIS looked at in detail by the new Education Scrutiny Committee, and therefore I hope that the Cabinet will take on those recommendations that we've put forward, particularly as the Chairman of Scrutiny has pointed out, the Learning Improvement Service, because I think we just realise that there's an issue there. And then over the page at F, encourage schools with low levels of permanent exclusion, because we realise that in some cases, and dare I say it, in a lot of cases, academy schools seem to be excluding more than we might consider to be appropriate, and I think we need to make sure that that is looked at in serious detail. Thank you.
I'll ask the Cabinet member if she'd like to respond.
Yes, thank you for that. The minutes that will come back from Education Scrutiny to myself, we will have a discussion with the Director, my assistant, myself will have a discussion with the Director at our weekly Cabinet member briefing, and then be able to report back to Scrutiny. So we'll do that as soon as possible.
Councillor Field?
Thank you. Just to move from Suffolk-wide to local, I just wanted to emphasise the paragraph about Great Blakenham and its highways issues. I think we had at the CETA liaison meeting another sort of run round that set of problems, and I won't bore you with them here, other than say that they are significant. They are affecting our reputation with a significant local population, and obviously that impacts people's willingness to accept change and other development, which we wish for in the area. So just to re-emphasise the paragraph in the scrutiny report, that does need looking at. It needs looking at in a quite a wide context, certainly a parish-wide context, if you like, a media area, rather than something just about the entrance into a particular gateway. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? In which case I'll ask Cabinet if they're happy to accept the report. Agreed? Thank you very much indeed. Right, we move on to item number 6, the first of the substantive items today. Nuclear waste, dealing with intermediate level waste storage facilities and fuel element debris treatment. You'll find the report starting on page 13, and I'll ask the Cabinet member, Councillor Smith, to speak to this paper.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I first of all just point out a small error? At the start of the report, under local councillors affected, we list Councillor Anne Gower. Now, Councillor Anne Gower, I'm very pleased, is my deputy cabinet member, but she's not a local councillor affected by this. It should be Michael Gower. Chairman, anything to do with nuclear matters is sensitive and controversial, and we all know that. But I do want to emphasise today that all Cabinet is being asked is to approve a response to what has turned out to be a fairly long-winded consultation process. The officer involved was David Polk, who has now left the council. He's retired, and of course we paid generous tribute to him at the council meeting before Christmas. But at all stages he has kept me fully informed of how that consultation and the various meetings were going. So today we are just here to approve a response which I would urge Cabinet to accept. I've been involved in nuclear matters at Sizewell since I think 2002, and I've also been involved with the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. Actually, before it was set up in 2006, I was involved in some of the early talks in 2005. I know them quite well. I know how they operate through Magnox, who run some of the nuclear power stations. And I know the NDA goes to great pains to consult, and then it publishes papers, and it is not unknown 18 months down the line for them completely to change their mind and start again. So we really mustn't think these are finalised proposals today. We're dealing with two types of nuclear waste. FED, fuel element debris, are pieces which were stripped off the casings of the fuel rods and have been stored as intermediate level waste. They're still stored at Sizewell A. Dungeness A in Kent also had FED, but it had a dissolution plant, and it has dissolved all its FED and now has none, and that dissolution plant stands unused at present. There's another dissolution plant being built, just about to become operational at Bradwell, and when I was touring Bradwell last autumn, I actually went inside that plant to have a look at it. So there is some logic in proposing that the fuel element debris safely stored at present at Sizewell A is moved to Dungeness, so that the unused dissolution plant there can cope with that waste. The other type of waste is intermediate level waste, and Sizewell A was a very clean and well-run site throughout its history, and there is a relatively very small amount of intermediate level waste at Sizewell A. There's other waste locally which is covered by this consultation at Bradwell and Dungeness. And Dungeness, the proposal is for the waste at Dungeness to be stored in a pre-existing newly built intermediate level waste store at Bradwell. And again, I went inside that store. It was empty, may I say. I wouldn't have been allowed in it if there had been any intermediate level waste, but it had just been commissioned. And one of the points that I made when I was there is, why wasn't it built larger? Because it seems to me an opportunity was missed to build a slightly larger store which could have stored all of Dungeness's waste. But we are where we are, and if a decision is taken to move Dungeness's intermediate level waste to the store at Bradwell, it is possible, and I do emphasise possible, that there may be about 20% of their waste which won't fit in there, and they would have to come to be stored at Sizewell A, and there would have to be a new ILW store built to cope with that. I'd really like to say, and it is a point made in the report, that I think the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority is missing one clear and, to me, obvious way of going forward, and that's cross-boundary thinking with EDF at Sizewell, so that there is one intermediate level store in common at Sizewell, coping with the present waste from Sizewell A, the waste that's being generated at Sizewell B, and of course the possibility of waste from a Sizewell C site, if that comes about. To me, that seems to be the logical thing to do, and it is part of our submission that we ask them to think about that. In the worst possible scenario, and people will get anxious about this, if intermediate level waste is proposed to come partly from Dungeness to Sizewell, it's not the end of the story, because there are various Suffolk County Council planning impediments in the way of that happening. So we've got a lot to go through before that is allowed. And I would prefer it not to be at Sizewell, but we will see. If it does happen, we will also press for a very generous community benefits package, as the intermediate level waste will have to be stored at Sizewell for some considerable length of time before a deep geological repository is built, and the earliest date that is likely to be built and commissioned is 2040. So that's all for future consideration. I commend what we have in front of us, Chairman, as a response, and I would urge Cabinet to accept the recommendations 1A to H.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Smith. Open it up for questions, comments, first of all, from Cabinet. No? Okay. Other members of the Council present? Yes, Councillor Field.
Just a question about this process of dissolving fuel element debris. Asking really whether we're in agreement believing that a good process, because it seems to be one of turning a solid debris, which is obviously not too mobile, into a liquid debris, which is decidedly more mobile. And knowing they have lots of problems with that at Sellafield at the moment, I wondered what our view is on that process in total. Should it be one that would be avoided by some other form of encapsulation?
Do you want to answer that, Councillor Smith?
Yes, I think I can answer it. At Dungeness, the Fed has been successfully dissolved using a process using carbonic acid. It's a fairly slow process, but it has been very successful. It was undertaken under an environmental permit granted by the Environment Agency and is regarded as the best available technique.
Thank you. Councillor Alton and then Councillor McGregor.
Thank you. I just wonder what relationship or what conversation that Suffolk is having with, I'm assuming, Essex and Kent. Are they happy with what is being proposed? And that if the proposal is to transport this waste by train, one assumes that the train would have to go via high density areas of population, for example Essex and East London, and therefore what communications is this council having with those relevant local authorities?
Chairman, thank you for that question. Yes, there are negotiations going on between Essex County Council and Kent County Council, and indeed Malden Borough Council was quoted in the press the other day saying they're not very happy to have extra ILW there, and if they do, they will want a generous community benefits package. So as I say, we're a long way from that. But if there is transportation, and we don't want to transport intermediate level waste around any more than you absolutely have to, it will be transported by train in pre-existing proven flasks, which at the moment transfer spent fuel elements from Sizewell A up to Sellafield. It will go by East London, I'm sure you're right on that. But in the whole history of rail transport of ILW, there has been no accident. It's highly regulated and very safe.
Thank you. Good that you've got all this background knowledge, Councillor Smith, really, isn't it? It's very helpful this morning. Councillor McGregor and then Councillor Mann.
Yes, just one or 2 points. I mean, what slightly distresses me is the changing direction, or put another way, not thinking sufficiently far ahead as far as this particular body is concerned. It does worry me in terms of their competence in this particular matter. And certainly in terms of community benefit, and we established this, if you like, the first time round. I mean, you mentioned David Polk, and he was the prime person, officers, who I encouraged to get that in here. You're absolutely right, we must get community benefit for Suffolk. And certainly as far as the train service is concerned, I mean, as you say, Councillor Smith, it's all being used. I would like to see a contribution towards improving that whole particular service, quite honestly. I think that has a valuable resource in terms of getting this nuclear stuff off the roads.
Can I just comment? I don't disagree with what Councillor McGregor has said, but that's not what we're considering today. We are considering a response to the consultation. If things move a stage further forward, then this will all come very much to the fore. And as I say, his comments are noted, and I agree with them.
Note those, and there will be discussion for another day. Councillor Manford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Councillor Smith said at the beginning, anything to do with the nuclear industry is a very emotive subject, and we're discussing 2 things today. One is the intermediate level waste, which, as I understand, is rather low. The fuel element debris, which I believe has a higher radioactive content. And paragraph 35 on page 18 says, it is estimated that around 60 lorry loads of FED would need to be transported from Sizewell A station to the Sizewell Halt between 2017-2019, so a 2-year period. Who is responsible for the security of this, and are there provisions in place for a potential terrorist attack on this, because it's going by road? And do we have any information? I'm thinking along the lines of a dirty bomb type thing in the area that it would be in. Thank you.
Chairman, yes, there is security in place. At the moment, the rail halt is about 2/3 of a mile from the Sizewell A site, and the flasks are taken by lorry from the Sizewell A power station to the marshalling yard under armed police escort. There is the separate civil nuclear authority who has responsibility for safety within 5 kilometres of nuclear power stations, and they take their responsibilities very seriously indeed.
Sir Brian, next, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one. If this store is built, will it bring any more new jobs into the area? Thank you.
Again, Chairman, we're looking into the future, which is more than this paper is saying. But I don't think if an intermediate level store is built, it will necessarily create any more permanent jobs. It will create jobs, obviously, in the construction of it, because they are very robust buildings.
Thank you.
Indeed. Any other questions or comments? Anything Cabinet wants to now raise, having heard all of that? Okay, are you happy to come to a decision on this? You've got the recommendations which Councillor Smith has taken us through. Can I ask if you're happy to agree the recommendations that you find on page 13 and 14 of the report? Are we agreed? All agreed? Thank you very much indeed. We move on to item number 7, which is the extension of contracts for health, care and wellbeing services. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A number of quite significant contracts, the value of approximately £6.5 million, are due to expire in 2014. These relate to housing support, home improvement, home from hospital services, There's a specific resource in Waveney, and there's our significant partnership with Suffolk Family Carers. Some of these contracts are jointly funded by our partner organisations. There are several major factors affecting both the procurement and the tendering processes, specifically changes in government policy, primarily that of the further integration of health and social care currently being driven by our arrangements with the Better Care Fund, which is talked of in our next paper this morning. Secondly, there's a consistent drive for better value for money, more effective ways of working, and the delivering of our future savings, particularly in relation to the Adult and Community Services New Ways of Working, our Supporting Lives and Connecting Communities programme. Cabinet is being asked to authorise a defined extension to these contracts, really to allow us to align with changes afoot with integration, and to allow particularly proper time for consultation where significant changes might be proposed, and to recommission in line with our new operating model. The lengths of these extensions desired are thought to ensure effective completion of the work required, specifically within the Council's Good Practice Guide, and to minimise any challenge by current providers by keeping them well informed and engaged, potential providers by providing an opportunity of them for co-producing the best options for working with our future. Certainly quality impact assessments will form part of that process and are doing so. There are housing-related support, 34 contracts, largely to enable vulnerable and adults and young people to live independently. Some details of that are given in Appendix A of the paper. Formal work with stakeholders is about to begin, and prior to Christmas we had a very useful meeting with the voluntary sector, convened by our Cabinet Member of Public Protection, Colin Spence, who has voluntary sector liaison responsibility. And there was a further meeting yesterday, I understand. It seems plain to me that this sector feels that they can, when contracted on our behalf, to do things more efficiently and more effectively. It's something we must take advantage of. Not all contracts may need to run to the end of the proposed extension period. The specifics: home improvement. This is a partnership agreement with boroughs and districts, except Suffolk Coastal Work, which is grant funded. And this involves the Disabled Facilities Grant, which has now been included in the Better Care Fund arrangements and are currently under negotiation with our strategic partners. Now, this will be a jointly commissioned process and discussed in the next Cabinet paper. Currently, this contract expires in 2014, July of that year, this year. Home from Hospital, another important contract. This is a 3-year contract set up in 2009, already with a 2-year extension running, expiring in March of this year. NHS commissioners have already provided additional funding for this, and it also falls within the remit of the Better Care Fund arrangements, and therefore subject to joint commissioning. The Mental Health Pooled Fund Service is a particular contract running to do with mental health services in Waveney, separately commissioned to the rest of Suffolk. Great Yarmouth and Waveney Clinical Commissioning Group, one of our strategic partners, has asked for a contract extension while they commission a new service. And I think this is crucial to the redevelopment of mental wellbeing services with early intervention and reablement. Lastly, Suffolk Family Carers is one of our very important strategic partners, as it is with children and young people and public protection. They're part of the contract partnership. We need to change this in line with our Supporting Lives programme. We're now beginning to roll that out across Suffolk. It's primarily preventative, helping people to help themselves in their homes process. Another reason for changing our Suffolk Family Partners arrangements is that the forthcoming government legislation, the Care and Support Bill, will involve new responsibilities for family carer services. And the Better Care Fund contains an element of family carer services in the pool budget, another reason for close examination. All these contract extensions will allow proper consultation, clarity and planning for our services. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That summarises the paper, and I commend the recommendations to Cabinet, page 29. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Murray. Opening it up for questions and comments. Councillor Chambers first, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to express my support for the paper we have in front of us. I can give a very practical example of why this is so important at this time. We've, through the Corporate Parenting Board, set up a housing subgroup to look at housing provision for young people, not only leaving care but other vulnerable young people in Suffolk. It's a cross-party group. It will actually be working with the voluntary sector and all districts and boroughs, and we really need to do an extensive piece of work there to fully understand what provisions and what services we need for the future. So by extending these contracts, it actually will benefit better outcomes to support the young people in Suffolk.
Any other questions or comments from Cabinet members? Okay, we'll open it up for other members of the Council present. Yes, Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Chair. It sounds like a very sensible thing to do to extend the contracts, but I just wondered whether all the 5 in today, if you were changing it today, is there anything you would have changed to any of these contracts? And are there then room for talking to them about what you might have liked differently, if anything, from now up until the better care contract come in place?
Well, I think we are talking to them. There are things to be changed. I mean, the better care discussions are ongoing on a daily, not just weekly basis at the moment, coming to the Health and Wellbeing Board for discussions and hopefully support, I think, on February the 2nd.
Councillor Otten, next then, please.
Yes, one of the issues obviously being dealt with is on disabled facilities grants. And I certainly know that one of the district councils, money is put aside, but they do have a problem trying to spend that money through the lack of occupational therapists. So I would ask the portfolio holder, as part of this re-evaluation of the contracts, if that could be looked at.
Yes, thank you. I'm very well aware of the potential and actual problems with OT support, and the Better Care Fund it specifically wants to look at that as part of its remit. But having said that, there is a lot going on in Suffolk. I've spent several hours recently at so-called multidisciplinary teams at GP surgeries that are involving both OTs, physios, palliative care, GPs. It's a new way of working, and I can already say that it must be the way forward. But yes, we are very well aware. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from anyone? Yes, Councillor Finch.
I would like to support this paper, but I'd just like to point out to Cabinet, I mean, I'm delighted. It is a very big, the housing-related support budget is a large budget, and if I may, I would just talk specifically about people I know in the Stour Valley who are working towards this for independent living for 2 boys that are genuinely in need of looking for that. The parents do not want to actually even to leave home, but they want to make sure that they're appropriately housed so that they feel comfortable to leave them in older age, and they have the peace of mind that they will have accommodation when they're not with them. And I certainly welcome this extension and all the work that's going to be done to transform that service. Thank you.
Anything you want to come back on that, Councillor Murray?
Yes, thank you. Well, just to reiterate that the whole process is undergoing review at the moment, but our plan, our intention, and I can say that we have no need, requirement, will to reduce our existing service capacity and not reduce the range of customers we currently support. I think we're extremely aware that we are held up to support our most vulnerable people, and throughout all budgeting processes, any discussions with things like the Better Care Fund, where we now have an influence, where we may not have had an influence with the health service before, our bottom line is support of our vulnerable clients. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions or comments, we'll move to the recommendations. On page 29, is Cabinet happy to accept the recommendations as detailed there? All agreed? Thank you very much indeed. Item number 8 is the Better Care Fund. You'll find the report from page 39, and I invite Councillor Murray to speak again on this item.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman. The Better Care Fund, formerly known as the Integration and Transformation Fund, was announced really as part of the comprehensive spending review in June of this year. June of this year. And it's built on the aspirations of the Caring and for Our Future white paper that came out in July 2011. Basically promoting well-being, independence and a reduction in the level of crises. The Better Care Fund is a redistribution of existing monies. It is not new money. In Suffolk it amounts to just over £50 million. The arrangements for which will be decided by Suffolk County Council and our strategic partners. These are the clinical commissioning groups. The governance of this process, extremely important, will be overseen by the Suffolk Health and Wellbeing Board and will be discussed on, I believe, February the 7th. Public Health, now incorporated within the Council, are also deeply involved with the process and it's being developed on a day-to-day basis by the Systems Leadership Partnership, bringing together commissioners, providers, districts and boroughs and important stakeholders such as the voluntary sector and Health Watch, the Public Guardian. And the plans need to dovetail with a joint health and wellbeing strategy for Suffolk based on our joint strategic needs assessment. So it all needs to fit with what we want to do and how we go about doing it. The timescale is relatively tight. 2 and 5 year plans are under development for submission and will be examined, as I said, next week at the Health and Wellbeing Board. This paper asks Cabinet to agree that the draft plans are consistent with our policy and our joint health and wellbeing strategy, and it also asks Cabinet to delegate decision making for our agreement of the plan. The key features are better information advice, more support within communities in terms of housing and carers, better reablement and crisis response, and these are all aspirations that are encapsulated in Suffolk Supporting Lives and Connecting Communities programmes. It requires decisions to be made on the distribution of carers' breaks funding, reablement funding, capital funding, including that of the Disabled Facilities Grant, and the existing transfer of not insignificant sums of health service money into social care. Now, much needs to be done regarding public engagement and consultation of this process. There are 3 interlinked strands being developed. That's urgent care, efficient hospitals and healthy independent individuals. National conditions will be applied to protect social care services, but support things like 7-day working, data sharing, an important aspect, joint assessments, and the overall responsibility with a named accountable professional. And there will be important local developments and conditions applied to the fund's distribution. Now, I regret that in this paper it is necessarily open-ended and perhaps even raising more questions than it answers. I think that the imposed timescale is all important, and in some respects the very short timescale has driven the various organisations out of their individual financial silos and has brought them round the table as partners, all agreeing that we need a way forward, and the sooner we get on and organise it, the better. So thank you, Chairman. This summarises the paper and I commend its recommendations to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Murray. Councillor Noble would like to speak first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It is a very interesting paper. It is relatively short, and sometimes some of the more significant things that we'll be involved in here at the County Council sometimes are quite a short paper. I am minded back to some of the conversations we've had over the years of how social services will look at and cope with an ageing population here in Suffolk. And I think a long time ago, as we were formulating Supporting Lives and Connecting Communities, we realised that there had to be this fundamental shift in the way in which we deliver services, and that the preventative agenda, so that people live far longer independent lives and are healthier, is a key to how we're going to cope with the changing demographics here in Suffolk and indeed the country. And I think one of the most interesting things as this fund is created, as we look to the relationship between health and social care, when this journey started, it was seen as a fix for social care. That was how it was originally sold. And I think over a period of time, it has been fascinating watching commentators and various other peoples within the health sphere talk about how this is actually, it's not just a fix for social care, this is actually how we're going to save the NHS. This is absolutely what we have to be doing, and we have to fundamentally change the way in which we have a health service, because we don't have a health service in this country. We have an illness service, and a service built on episodes of illness. In the notion that you get ill, you go to your doctor, you have a diagnosis, you go to hospital, they give you a pill, a treatment, surgery, and you are discharged and you get on with your life. But as we age, what we know is that we will have complexity, and there will be many conditions that are about the management and living with. And I think one of the most powerful things I've seen is if you Google Sam, and Sam is an 87-year-old gentleman, and this is the King's Fund, and there is a small video. And when you watch that video, you see virtually this journey from a fix for social care to a fix to the NHS, to actually about how you deliver services for people that will cost less money and deliver them a far better outcome in their lives. So this is a moment in time, and I think those of us who are here in years to come will actually be able to look back at this paper and think, yeah, that actually was a moment, and I was there, and that was really the first steps. There are immense challenges. Nobody is disguising the fact that working with the NHS is anything but a challenge. The language is quite, it's not really a change of dialect. Quite often it's a fundamental different language, and there are huge challenges to come. But the ultimate prize and ultimate goal is that if we are to deal with an ageing population, and if we are to improve outcomes for people, and the system isn't going to collapse, then these are the first steps along that journey.
Councillor Chambers, next, please.
Thank you. I think we can all see that this is a significant piece of work, as Councillor Murray has already explained. But it is a piece of work which will deliver better integration, not only for, and we've already heard from Councillor Murray and Councillor Noble about it being predominantly about, expressed at the moment, predominantly about older people and ageing. But actually the work that I've been doing around this is very much looking at how you can achieve better outcomes, and it's very much about lifelong solutions for families and for children. So the work we're doing in terms of implementing the new operating model and the new operating model phase 2 is a significant piece of work towards this. I think, as we see with the Health and Wellbeing Board, seeing CYP, ACS and Health all coming together to deliver those better integrated opportunities for all of the residents, we will see better outcomes for our families in Suffolk. So very much supportive of this piece of work. It is a significant piece of work, and we have a lot of work to do in it, but it's got to be the right way for us to go.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Chambers. Any other comments from members of Cabinet before I open it up to other members of the Council present? Okay. Anybody else? Yes, Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Sir Bruce Keir, the NHS Medical Director for England, was quoted as saying that if NHS money, if money for prevention of illness was given to local authorities, they would just spend it on filling potholes. Now, if we are rearranging our preventative health services through social care, and at the same time cutting existing provision, is there not a real danger that anybody looking in from outside would say, oh, well, you're just using NHS money in order to compensate for the fact that you're cutting your own resources in this area? And I'm thinking in particular of supporting health, people and Home Start.
I'm almost tempted to ask Councillor Newman to respond to that. And then I'll bring in Councillor Murray.
Yes,
Pleased to hear Sir Bruce Keir's name mentioned, another surgeon in control. Brilliant. I think, yes, from the outside looking in, it's a very complex system. From the inside looking out, it's incredibly complex. It really is. But this is one chance. We do have these chances every so often where the whole system is turned on its head, theoretically, to change perceived problems. I think the difference this time, looking back over 30-odd years of health service change, and there has always been change, is that we do have the right people around the table. We're incredibly lucky in Suffolk with our 2 hospitals, 3 hospitals, 2.5 hospitals over further to, including James Paget. But we have some very proactive CEOs running these hospitals now, some very able people. There have been changes locally, we know, in Ipswich in recent past. In Stephen Graves and Nick Hume, we've got some very able people who are around the table, very happy to come out of their silos and not just change what goes on in their hospitals, the very expensive end, but they see their future changing what's happening in our communities. And I think that's very important. Thank you.
I can't help but respond to that bait, Chairman. It's just been put in front of me. This authority spends £200 million a year on adult social services and over £100 million a year on children's social services. And what we're talking about here is trying to make that expenditure more effective with a little bit of pump priming. By contrast, this authority spends £2.5 million a year repairing potholes and indeed other short-term maintenance issues on our highways. So I think it's going to take an awful lot of money to make a significant change, and any justification to the statement just made. I think the issue that we've got around this is that, you know, an awful lot of money is spent in healthcare for which we have the outcome. A lot of the ways we want to go in terms of prevention for the future, we don't have records on money that has been spent and how it has changed things. That is our big challenge about how money is spent in this field of endeavour, and yet intrinsically we know things are better. For more than 40 years now, the country as a whole has fought to convince people that smoking is not good for you. Still, 23% of our people in this county are smoking. And, you know, until we can get some really gravitas in getting that 23% significantly reduced to single figures and the like, we will continue to not really be able to say for sure this preventative activity is better than any amount of cancer surgery that you'll need to go through should you suffer a lung cancer or one of the other diseases which are brought on by smoking. That's just one example of many which we need to address going forward in terms of what we're eating and the sort of exercise that we take. That's why there's a lot of activity in our area of endeavour, you know, to produce opportunities for people to do more exercise. And that's the way I think we will save the National Health Service. The pothole issue, I think, is just a sort of sideshow comment, really.
Okay, good, fulsome answers there. But Councillor Martin, do you want to come back? And I will bring Councillor Lockwood in after.
Well, just to say I completely agree with everything that Councillor Newman and Councillor Murray said, but they didn't answer the question. I think working jointly with health services is absolutely crucial. I totally agree with that. And also, I do agree that there's an awful lot that we can do which will save society in the long run by encouraging people to have healthier lifestyles. And as somebody who gave up smoking not so very many years ago, I can tell you I'm much more effective and healthy and bouncy and irritating than I was when I was smoking. But if we are actually reducing the county council's contribution to the overall pot at the time when we are working jointly with the National Health Service, there is a real danger that we will not get the cooperation from the health service that we need in order to make this work properly.
Let's bring in Councillor Lockington and then I'll let Councillor Murray come back.
Sorry, I'd love to just take a few seconds just to think a bit more about our potholes and roads, because I actually understand a bit how it linked, because we have the public health report all about getting people out and getting them active. And many elderly people say, well, we can only get out if we've got good pavements. So, you know, there is a link between the roads we drive on, you know, and the pavements we have with good health. So I think we shan't just sort of say, oh, be careful what you do, because if a good pavement can mean that the elderly person there go out walking because they're not falling over a slab sticking up or something like that, they get out walking, they get far better health, they don't cost the health service as much. So I think there's a link.
I think we understand about potholes in this administration. I know. Councillor Murray.
Yes, it's just to say that as Suffolk County Council, we're not the only partner that's trying to reduce and use its money more efficiently. The health services are, mental health services locally too, so it's very important. I agree that all directorates in Suffolk County Council have something to do with health and well-being. And it was the whole drive of the public health report that was published late last year, which we discussed at full council. Every directorate has a role to play in that. Thank you.
Chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board is certainly nodding agreement to that. Any other questions or comments that anyone would like to raise on this paper? Okay, if not, we move to the recommendation on page 39. Is Cabinet content to agree it? All agreed? Thank you very much indeed. We move on, last but by no means least, item number 9, which is the revenue budget for 2014-15 and the capital programme for 2014 to 2017. I'm going to invite the Cabinet member with responsibility for Finance, Councillor Noble, to speak, and other members of Cabinet will then be invited to make comment about it in relation to their own portfolios and responsibilities. So first of all, Councillor Noble, if you'd like to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It gives me great pleasure to introduce this report. In my few words, I'm going to speak a little bit about the approach we've taken to the budget setting. I'm going to talk about the deliverability, and I'm going to talk about the robustness, and I will focus a little bit on the reserve position in the robustness. But before I do that, I felt it would be useful just to have a little bit of a few words around the context of this. And I am immensely minded that since I was elected to the County Council in 2006, I have sat and watched Councillor Story sit in this place and deliver these speeches, and she certainly has very big boots to fill. Mine personally are in the back of my car. They're a pair of Dunlop construction industrial boots. Hers, I know, are usually high-heeled and leather, but and I'm aware she's behind me. And I did say to her earlier that I don't want it to be like Moyes and Sir Alex sitting in the stands, but I certainly am aware that this is a big boots to fill. Just talking about the context of this, I'm minded in preparing for today to think about and read the various cabinet papers going back into the early 2000s. And I am aware that I am occasionally known for reminding the opposition of their terrible track record in power and their 11.9 and 18.5% increases. Now, I'm not going to focus on 11.9 and 18.5% increases today, but it is interesting when you read those papers that there's actually quite a bit more going on. Over the years, we have seen the council tax increases drop under this administration, and we have delivered the last 3 years at zero. And this year, for the first year of a 4-year period, because we are now considering the budget in much more in terms of the term of this council and the savings we have to make over that period, we are delivering the first of our promises of 0% council tax increases. But at the same time, when you read back through those papers, there are other things going on about grants and support grants. And it's certainly true, when I came in 2006, the debates for a period of time were about the size of the grants, the demographic pressures, but they were always upwards, and we were always receiving more money. And whilst I said I wouldn't mention 11.9 and 18.5, certainly in those years we were looking at 5 and 6% increases in the grant. But the Cabinet papers also give you something else, and it comes to the second point I'm going to talk about deliverability. There was a culture issue there, not so much the philosophical stance, I think, of the political parties in power at the time. I think also about the behavioural patterns of the County Council and the way that has changed. In those days, it was an organisation that believed in the delivery of services at a very direct as a provider, and I think those things have changed, and I will touch on that in the deliverability. So there is a context to this, and of course this is the first of 4 years where we have to save 156 million over those 4 years, and at the weekend I think nationally perhaps some of the debate moved as well, in that we had Ed Balls, I think possibly for the first time, talk about the economic sense of actually balancing a budget. which for Ed Balls, given his track record in government, is nothing short of a revelation. Now, whether he can achieve it or the Conservatives achieve it is another matter. But certainly what it does tell you is that there's probably a 10-year period from the autumn statement in 2010 by the incoming Chancellor, George Osborne. There is a 10-year period where, at the very least, we are seeing significant grant reductions, and that is a very changed world from the one we saw in the early 2000s. And I think it is worth commenting upon, because I think it sets the scene for the budget. How have we gone about this? Having been elected last May, I think we decided that actually what we needed to do was launch into the biggest budget conversation we've ever had in this county council. And at Appendix C, we see the results of some of those discussions with the Mori poll, where we've gone out and we've asked Mori to tell us what people in Suffolk are thinking, and they've made some very interesting conversations. This coming year, we'll see more work done around the Suffolk 1000, where we invite a series of people to become a panel so that we can test some of our theories, and we have on the front of our website a survey so people can fill those in, and I and many other councillors have been round to the area committees in Ipswich and across the parishes and Salk and into the business communities and talked about the budget setting process and talked about some of our aims in a very open way. And there's no doubt at the back of that there are some significant changes that we have made here with things such as Our Place, One Haverhill, Lowestoft Rising, Newmarket Vision. And I think we are taking the first tentative steps to a real change in the way in which we do our business, and the first tentative steps to participatory budgeting. And I will move on very shortly to talk about the deliverability, and I think there is a lot about how we work with our communities and how we design services together, because I think that has a significant effect on the deliverability of services. Now, a budget is a financial framework. It is somewhat measured at the outturn reports Q1, 2, 3 and 4. But actually, the real test of it is, how does it feel on the ground? How does it feel for people out there? How does it feel for our communities? And a very long time ago, when I took over from Councillor Newman in adult social care, the very first conversation I have, and I remember it to this day, was with somebody called Daphne Savage, who at the time was the very formidable CE of Age UK Suffolk. And she said to me, and she looked me up and down, and she said to me, well, the trouble with you lot is you come in here and you stomp all over the daisies with a clipboard, and then you look round how to try and plant the flower bed. And I thought to myself then, what she was saying to me was, we aren't very good at how we work with our communities. We aren't very good at how we work with the voluntary sector. And I think over these years there has been a cultural change, and we are very much more focused upon our communities, what goes on in them, and around the assets that are out there. And I think a very fundamental aspect of how we deliver this budget, how we deliver over these 4 years, is a simple notion that if we work closer with our communities, if we do the things that our communities need so that people can live more connected, healthier lives in those communities, we can actually make the savings we've got and potentially deliver better services than we are delivering today. And that is not some form of pie in the sky. We see it day in, day out with supporting lives and connecting communities. Going in, working out what's going on in community, working out what they really need. Not what we think they need, but what they actually need. So the deliverability, because of the strategies we've set, I believe is extremely doable. And a really, really good example of this is libraries. We've had to take money out of the library service. We've helped create the Independent Providence Society. And what has happened? Our libraries are being used. Not a single library... Now, I appreciate, Councillor Martin, that this is an inconvenient truth for you, but not a single library has closed. We have taken the money out of the libraries, and there are more people engaged with our libraries through friends and through administration and being part of them than there has ever been in the history of this council. And that is a tangible indication of the fact that we can do these things. Now, I want to move on to robustness. And I want us to have a little look at Appendix H. So if we could perhaps turn to Appendix H, which is in the sort of workbook. if you go to page 1 of Appendix H, you see the pie chart. And one of the really interesting things here, I think, is that we very focus on council tax. We're very focused on the grants we get. And I think one of the things we need to be looking at is this interplay, because there are a lot of conversations taking place about the robustness of plans and delivery based on your council tax base, based on the diminishing grant, based on business rates. And it's certainly something I think as a cabinet we need to be focused on, rather than some of those more headline indicators about the relationship of how we actually arrive at some of these things. But returning to inconvenient truths, I would like us now, if we could turn to page 102 in the papers, which is, if you have a look at Appendix B, which is Jeff's report, we arrive at Table 1, which is the summary of reserves. And we are aware from Councillor Martin's radio interview this morning, and we're aware from their various press releases, that the contingency reserve has indeed gone up. We have increased our contingency reserve. And it is perhaps an inconvenient truth for Councillor Martin that actually the overall reserve position has dropped by £11.5 million and 9%. And that is very much about being in line with the amount of money we actually now spend. So the overall reserve position has dropped. What we have done is that we have looked at service reserves and some of the other reserves, and we have put more money into the contingency reserve, and we have restricted some of the money in the service reserves, in part because what we know is that over the past 3 years, as we've demanded the savings to be made of £95 million, the services have been able to manage this and are projecting that they will continue to be able to live within their reserves. So whilst I fully accept, Councillor Martin, the contingency reserve has gone up, in anything you do put forward on February the 13th, of course you will address the fact that the overall reserve has gone down. And I appreciate and look forward to that. So, Mr. Chairman, our approach to the budget has been about listening to what Suffolk people value and what they tell us they wish us to protect. The deliverability is about working and building on Suffolk's strengths to protect services for the vulnerable in our communities. And robustness is about prudence. It is about making sure that we have reserve positions so we can address any peaks and troughs that come our way, and we can continue to deliver with appropriate reserves. Mr. Chairman, this budget fulfills our election promise to protect the most vulnerable and the hard-working families struggling to pay their bills, and it is welcome news that we are fulfilling our promise of 0% council tax increase.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Noble. I invite other members of the Cabinet, if they would now like to speak around their responsibilities. Who would like to be first? Balls being passed around the court here. Councillor Chambers, why don't you go first?
I'll go first. I just mention a little bit about the CYP budget. This has been set on 2 principles of making the savings that we need to find, but also protecting our frontline services. Raising attainment in Suffolk schools remains our number 1 priority for this administration, and this is reflected in our budget as we continue to provide the necessary capital funds for the completion of SOAR, which is a key part of our strategy to raise attainment. We can fund the revenue set-up costs of SOAR from reserves, freeing up £1 million from our base budget, without reducing the funding to all of the schools involved. As we seek to raise attainment, we must recognise that the role of the local authority has significantly changed with schools, and we need to continue to adapt to this. We can make savings by stopping some non-statutory support to schools in some areas, such as competitive sport. Other authorities across the county have already carried this out and implemented this. This clearly doesn't mean that competitive sport will stop, but schools will organise it themselves, and we can concentrate our resources and our core business on raising attainment. I think this also reflects some of the government policy in terms of funding which is given directly to schools now to provide sports within schools. The same principles apply to the plans for savings made through Making Every Intervention Count programme. We will build on our success of the new operating model in redesigning services in an integrated way, with the focus on prevention and early intervention and reduced management costs. And I think this has been clearly demonstrated in the previous papers that Councillor Murray has presented today, in demonstrating different ways of working to achieve better outcomes. The main changes in this budget are to children's centres, and we will be consulting widely with our partners and with the service users. Children's centres play a vital role in our communities, but we are confident that we can deliver the services at lower costs with improved outcomes.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I've got Councillor Murray next then, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said to Councillor Finch earlier on this morning, not to reduce overall capacity or the range of customers supported. That's our bottom line, and that we will support very strongly. Move away from fixed block contracts to outcome-based personalised support. Very, very important. Not bricks and mortar, but helping individuals move through a process, improving their health and well-being, giving them somewhere to go. Better services, more effective, more efficient, and investing to save where we need to, but I think investing wisely. Thank you.
Very much indeed. I've got Councillor Spence next then, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, it probably hasn't escaped the notice of many of you that the public protection part of this budget has not, at this moment in time, seen any reduction. But what I would say is, please don't have any false sense of security over that. But there are some reasons why the recommendations this morning do not include cuts to public protection. First of all, I would like to really congratulate Councillor Noble and his team for the work that they have carried out on preparing the information that we've got for us today. I know, as do many and all of our colleagues in the Cabinet, that the work that's gone into actually trying to come to this, to bringing this to here today, has been immense, and I congratulate them all. We have, I think, over the last 3 years, my opinion, really stepped up to the financial challenge that we've had to face. And looking forward on this doesn't get any easier, but I'm confident that we've developed a very innovative and considered approach to meeting our savings targets without increasing council tax. In terms of my own directorate, joint emergency planning, trading standards, fire and rescue and community safety are delivering the final stages of the savings of between 12 and 40% over the last 3 years. And whilst these haven't been easy, they've been delivered in a manner that has maintained an effective delivery of services to the most vulnerable people in our communities. Colleagues will have seen that one of the 10 transformation programmes that's now in place, moving forward to the next stage of where we have to be with all of this, is to consider alternative governance arrangements for our fire and rescue service and the potential for greater blue light services integration. In 2011, we agreed a 4-year programme of work across our fire and rescue service, and this has seen a number of changes to the way in which the fire service is provided. Of course, colleagues will be aware that of the ongoing public consultation, which has just started about the final changes to Felixstowe Fire Station, and this is likely to see the final stage of the 4-year programme, subject to Cabinet approval, being completed in 2014. And hopefully there will be a report, Mr. Chairman, to the Cabinet sometime in the spring. The budget consultation in 2012 and again in 2013 has been very clear in setting out the public's view of our fire and rescue service. And you colleagues will see from the results of the Ipso Mori poll exactly how highly regarded Suffolk's Fire and Rescue Service is. However, like the rest of the public sector, the fire services grant from government is expected to continue to reduce over the next 4 years, and this will impact on all fire and rescue services, including our own, across the country. We are also conscious that as a largely on-call and part-time fire service, we are already acknowledged as being very efficient. Difficult times require difficult and searching solutions, and ones that challenge our current ways of thinking and working. Government have been clear that they expect fire authorities to explore different approaches to governance as a way to minimise the impact on frontline services. Indeed, we are awaiting the government's response to a detailed report which the Minister commissioned shortly before the retirement of his previous advisor, Sir Ken Knight, on the review of the future of fire and rescue. And I think that that response from the government is awaited, and I hope that we will receive that fairly soon. It's for these reasons that we continue to seek out the best way to govern our fire and rescue service in the future. I'm determined that through this transformation project, we consider the best way to provide a fire and rescue service for our communities that is still highly valued and is doing the job, and in doing so to apply as much protection to frontline services as we can across Suffolk. There will be some work to be done, Mr. Chairman, and that work is probably already started, but it will be started in earnest soon, for all of the reasons that we don't have any reduction in budget now. We have got to face up to this, and colleagues will all be briefed in due course about the progress and engage with them on where we go from here. But it was important for me to say that because, by comparison to many of my colleagues who've taken quite large reductions in their budget, this is only a temporary stop while we actually review in greater detail what happens to our fire and rescue service in the future. The other thing I would just like to add, because it does come under my role and responsibility, is that Councillor Noble mentioned it in his introductory speech about the importance of working and engaging with communities and also with the voluntary sector, as did Councillor Murray earlier in his recommendations that he brought on earlier papers. A lot of work has gone on. Obviously, I have this role of working with the voluntary sector. A lot of work has gone on over the last year or so, which culminated in the voluntary sector leaders, many of the senior chief execs and leaders of voluntary organisations represented through the Suffolk Congress, coming to us and saying, we really want to work with you, and we want to help. Actually, we know what a problem you've got with the budget reductions. We would really like to actually be engaged with that. And that was why we had the meeting before Christmas with them. They then came and met the Cabinet, and we had the meeting again yesterday, where they're now beginning to shape up. They've really stepped up to the plate and wanted to work with the Council together in terms of the responsibilities that actually they have and we have together. Thank you.
Very much indeed, Councillor Spence. I've got Councillor Hoffensberger next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to be able to endorse this budget and the recommendations made. The locality's portfolio's actual budget is extremely small compared to that of my colleagues. However, it is not insignificant insofar as the transformation enabling programmes that are attached to it. The R-Place and local response programmes are essential to the delivery of the budget and the Council's ethos of empowering communities who know their communities best. They help shape the services for their place and in some cases deliver at a very local level. With my qualities and inclusion hat on, I'd like to draw your attention to pages 78 to 79 of the report, which refers to the Equality Impact Assessment. This process enables the protected groups and the more vulnerable groups' needs to be assessed in line with the savings proposals, providing our duty of care and showing our due diligence. Moving on to the portfolio-specific saving proposals, the savings made to the grants to the cultural sector are by no means a cut to support how we support those organisations or how we value the relationship with the sector. We already are having conversations with the sector on building resilience and sustainability for more efficient and broader funding sources, whilst working with our partnerships through the district and borough colleagues and the Arts Council. We want to ensure that the sector are helping the Council to deliver its its priorities and are part of the transformation programmes such as ArtLink through the work it does through our Supporting Lives and Connecting Communities programme. With regards to the library services, as Councillor Noble has already referred to, I'm very proud of what this council has managed to achieve through no closures and real community delivery. The library service continues to deliver savings whilst looking on how to expand and improve its services. I recommend this budget.
Thank you very much indeed. I've got Councillor Smith next, and then Councillor Newman.
Chairman, I can be fairly brief because I feel that I have talked about my particular areas, savings, at length to the Scrutiny Committee, and many people who are today will have heard that. I will briefly go through them. I don't cover, as Cabinet responsibilities, areas of really very big expenditure, except waste management. And of course that is the area where, through good timing and very good planning over the last few years, the energy from waste plant at Great Blakenham will come online later this year, and we will immediately accrue £7 million worth of savings in the 2014-15 financial year, which is coming at a time when we do need to find savings just at the right time. So I'm hugely proud of that, and I'm confident that those savings will be achievable. I actually make, within my area, £7.2 million worth of savings. I will just say the other £0.2 million comes from £170,000 in environmental strategy area savings there, and a £30,000 saving in economic development. Now, I just do also want to say that work is starting now, although we're agreeing next year's budget, work is starting on the following year's budget, because we do have a very tough ask for that. And all my officers are working because we need to do things differently, we need to do things much more efficiently, and the work that is underway will hopefully, at this time next year, produce more substantial savings than I can announce today for this year. But we do need that time to make sure the cuts that we propose in a year's time will be the proper cuts, and will not affect the services that this council needs to provide statutorily. And also, we all, I know as Cabinet members, have a desire to protect those most vulnerable in our county from the effects of these cuts.
Motion, Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to highlight a couple of points in the revenue savings. They're on Table 3. The saving ESE1 is a £100,000 saving in respect of the rights of way service, and that's being achieved largely through vacancy management on the definitive map scheme. Now, what that means is, of course, we won't be doing work that we currently do on the definitive map any faster, but we won't be doing it appreciably slower either, because it's a vacancy management issue. And I really want to emphasise in here that's no impact on works on the ground or to protect and maintain our public rights of way. The other notable saving there, £100,000 on the grant we pay to the Park and Ride service. That saving has been made possible by retendering the service recently, and we yield a further saving there. And indeed, we're working with Ipswich buses to try and promote the use of the Park and Ride service. We have the slight anachronism of nearly 1,000 car parking spaces split between London Road and Martlesham Heath. Between a quarter and a half of those are vacant at any one particular time of the day, and yet people are equally suffering congestion when they get into the centre of Ipswich. And I think when we get our Travel Ipswich proposals all switched on later in the year, it'll be a good time then to promote our Park and Ride service and get better utilisation of it. The savings that we made through the introduction of a new contract for highways maintenance don't show up as a saving in this year, because of course we were delayed in doing that in 2013-14, didn't bring the new contract into place into October, so that's a saving that we're already carrying forward really from last year. On capital, I'd like to confirm that what was shown this time last year as a road scheme in Waveney actually is phase 5 of the Lowestoft Northern Spine Road. We're hoping to start work on that very shortly now, have it completed in the early part of next year. And that's government pinch point fund money, which is about 4.6 million, and that's shown under ring-fence local government grants. And I think, we were talking earlier on about spending some money to sort of save cost. The important thing that they're doing in street lighting is a large number of street lights we still have on all night. We have a programme to convert those to LED luminaires. That will cost us quite a lot of money, and we show 2.5 million, I think, on an XE on that in respect of that. But the projected savings in power are £500,000 a year, which is really worth us having. The way we're going to be funding capital projects on the road system in the future, we don't have a lot of detail about that, and why there's some uncertainty about 2015-16 onwards. We have to bid to the single capital pot schemes which we've included in the strategic economic plan, which is run by the New Anglia LEP. We don't yet know how much money we're going to get from our government to spend on schemes in Suffolk. We have a prolific list of things we want to do, but we don't know exactly how we're going to spend money there in the future. That's obviously something which will develop as the year goes on.
May I just come back, because I did quote the figure in my department of £7.2 million savings. My directors jabbed me in the ribs and said, no, it should be 8.2. I apologise. At least I wasn't over-exaggerating. I was underestimating. But the annual savings from the energy from waste plant will be 8 million, not 7. I apologise.
Well, it's just, well, Lucy, you were sitting there then, really, wasn't it? Absolutely. Can I also commend this budget, which I think has been a great achievement, really, for this council, and is part of what we see as a 4-year strategy in dealing with this £156 million projected deficit that we are looking at. And I would like to, as others have done, commend the work that Councillor Noble has done, and his team in particular, Jeff Dobson, without whom I think this council would be the poorer in monetary terms as well as in advice. And I do congratulate you, Jeff, on the work that you've done and the team that lie behind you in that. Can I also thank the many departments that have worked in ensuring that we have this budget and we have the information that we have to hand, and they have dealt with the savings that we are asking of them. And also to do this, as Councillor Smith said quite rightly, in protecting our much valued frontline services, and particularly those who do have the call upon them from the most vulnerable parts of our community. When I became leader 3 years ago, I made it very clear that I didn't want to see a council run by dogma. I wanted to see a council that was run on pragmatic terms, that worked with the grain of the people of Suffolk and not against the grain of the people of Suffolk, and also sought to listen to them. And this budget and this budget consultation has clearly done that. And I think that the work of going out and listening to 4,000 people of Suffolk in gathering their views, I think has been a very valuable exercise in being able to feed. And it's been the most comprehensive consultation that we've done. And it is good to hear that 81% of the people are very satisfied with their county, and that nearly 50% of people are very satisfied with the services that Suffolk County Council runs. And I think that's something that we should all, of all parties, officers and members, take great comfort from. The work does begin on the forthcoming budgets that we need to do, and we need to do that work properly, and we want to do this in the context of how that will go forward. And we will use the evidence from the budget consultation and working with the Suffolk 1000 to ensure that we don't lose that important connection and touch with the people of Suffolk. We're also very proud, as Councillor Noble has said, that we will not be increasing our council tax this year, and indeed that we will stick to our election promise of not increasing it during the term of this council, something so important for people who are still struggling on low incomes. So very important that we continue to maintain that. I would like to commend this budget to this Cabinet, and I know that it has the support of Cabinet, but we also want to hear the views of those here from who are other members of the Council present. I'd like to open that up now to them, and then we can then move forward on that. Now I've got Councillor Martin first, and then Councillor Fitch. Thank you, Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got 4 questions, if you will indulge me to ask 4 questions. The first one is of the portfolio holder for health and social care. Can you tell us what work was done to identify the people who will be affected by the proposed cuts to Home Start and to supporting people and other preventative services, and the consequences of the withdrawal of those services and the cost to the council of dealing with those consequences? The second question is to Councillor Hoffmannsberger. There are several cuts in here to third sector organisations. Can she explain what work was done with those third sector organisations that they're having their grants cut in order to identify exactly what services will be lost and how much it will cost the council to deal with the consequences of those? Third and fourth are for Councillor Noble, because I know how disappointed you would be if I didn't ask him anything. And the third one is about reserves. As you clearly stated, the service reserves are more than adequate to cover the needs of those services. But you'll still have £61.7 million in the earmarked reserves to cover the known spending priorities, and you'll still have the £21 million in services reserves to cover any possible overspend in the provision of statutory services, and you will still have £11 million in the general reserve, which is twice the prudential minimum. So can you still tell us what knowledge you have which inclines you to believe that there is likely to be £6 million more possible call on the contingency reserve for the coming year than there was during last year? And finally, on capital, capital spend doesn't create a disproportionate revenue commitment and can make a significant contribution to the efficiency of council services and to economic growth. So can Councillor Noble explain why the administration is so reluctant to commit to capital expenditure?
I think we'll take those in the order that they were asked. So, Councillor Murray first.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Our proposals are based on our initial modelling, moving largely from block contracts to a more personalised and tailored support for the individual to move them through a system to move to outcomes-based products. Further work is certainly needed and is indicated in the Cabinet paper. We have done a lot of work already, consulting with our voluntary sector, our providers. We have a disabilities forum which we attend and talk at. We just had a stakeholders meeting with the home care and the Meals on Wheels providers. So there's a lot ongoing already. I perfectly accept there's an awful lot to be done, but things are ongoing, and the depth and breadth of our investigations and communication with our very important partners can't be underestimated. Thank you.
To Chambers next.
Yes, thank you. I think the Home Start question probably needed to refer to me rather than to Councillor Murray. So if I can start with that one. In terms of, if I can just set the context of Home Start first of all, and that's very much that it doesn't actually cover the whole county currently, and it doesn't cover the whole age range that we need to work with. So one of the processes that we will be going through, both with Home Start and through the voluntary sector, is looking at recommissioning something which offers us a family support service for the whole county and for the whole age range. And of course, Home Start are very welcome to tender for that process. So it's very much about being inclusive and working with them and working with other organisations to make sure that we improve the service and get a county-wide offer. You mentioned about what were we doing with the voluntary sector. I think Councillor Murray has already alluded to the fact that we've had 2 political meetings that both Councillor Murray and I have attended with many. I think there were about 30 representatives of the voluntary sector at the meeting. There's been additional officer meetings with the voluntary sector. Certainly, I can't speak on behalf of ACS. I know they have been doing, but certainly the officer team within CYP have been doing that. And we would be working with each individual organisation in terms of their grants and any reductions or re-tendering that had to be put into place. And some organisations, there has actually been individual meetings. I can mention the Lighthouse Trust, which we've been working with over the last few weeks, and there have been individual meetings with them to talk to them about the service delivery and what the options are going forward. I think that probably covers it all.
That's covered your first three questions, hasn't it? Now, Councillor Noble on the fourth.
Well, thank you. I was slightly... It was 3 and 4. I think that was 1 and 2. I think I had 3.
1 and 2.
Yeah, I had 3 and 4, yeah. And I was indeed getting slightly worried there, Councillor Martin, that there wasn't going to be a question for me. Okay. Right, okay. In terms of the reserve position, to some degree I sort of slightly restate what I said earlier. When you look at the reserves, we are holding the county general reserves at £10 million, £10.9 million. And you have to think about this in the context of the overall spend that we make, which over a period of time will change and it will go down, and that's why this year the overall reserves are going down. But we have the potential, always, for things to come at us, and that is what this is about. As I said earlier, in terms of the earmarked reserves are such things as raising the bar, the Endeavour card, and the other activities. In terms of those things, we are again looking at the amount of money. We have lowered them by 10 million. Again, it reflects the overall spend. In terms of the service reserves, I say the same thing as I said earlier. Yes, we are restricting those and we are putting more money into the contingency reserve, but in the context of overall lowering of the reserves. So it is about balancing out and committing a prudent amount of money so that we do not get hit with things and so that things do not blow us off course with what we're trying to do. Now, I do fully appreciate that we have in the past, and we know at a national level, that the Labour Party do genuinely believe in just spend, because at the end of the day, let's face it, tomorrow you can always tax. And that is what you did in Suffolk, and we are aware of that. But what this is about is having prudent reserves so that we can deliver what we say we are going to deliver. Now, moving on to the point about capital reserves, well, I have to say, Councillman, I just don't really recognise what you're saying. If we move and look at Appendix E, and we look at the specific amount of money on page 1 of what we're spending, this year we will spend some £93 million, at the same time of having a reserve position of 26.5. Now, in subsequent years, we're not absolutely sure what we are going to be getting, and that's why we have a healthy reserve there. So I don't actually agree with you. I actually think we are committing a significant amount of money to capital expenditure, and we hold a reserve so that we can address what changes come from central government. And as I said earlier, I think we are in a 10-year cycle of central government lowering the amount of money that we get. Your own Shadow Chancellor has said that by 2020 he wishes to balance the books. And so we hold those reserves. But we are still this year spending £93 million. I would say that was a significant capital spend.
And Councillor Hoffensberger, if you'd like to come in now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reduction in third sector grants, as I referred to in my opening speech, it's a continued dialogue. I have personally met with a lot of the organisations and the sectors that are affected by any savings to grants made. And these conversations about how we better support those organisations and the people affected through other services, rather than just plugging a gap through the monetary value. It's about rolling out our supporting lives and connecting communities and how we can support them through our transformation programmes. It's not just about the monetary grants that we give to those organisations, but as I said, it's a continuous dialogue which we will continue to build on, building up their resilience and helping support them through our other services.
Okay, I'm going to move on because I've got a long list of people that want to speak, and we did have 4, substantial questions there. I've got Councillor Finch next then, and then Councillor Gaylord.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by saying that clearly the Scrutiny Committee have looked at the budget in quite a lot of detail in terms of policy over 2 meetings. And I'd like to thank Colin Noble and Jeff Dobson for the recognition of the recommendations that were made out of that scrutiny session. And I think it's important also to remember that we've actually spoken and consulted with all our people of Suffolk by going around talking to them, and I was honoured to be at one of those meetings, and it was very interesting presenting at one of those meetings. And when you see them eyeball to eyeball, that they engage with you and they understand that the challenges that this council has to, and they say, well, is there another way? I would actually like to follow on thirdly from where Councillor Martin started, under the challenge of what he said in terms of continue from what Councillor Noble said about the capital spend, because there is a significant amount of capital spend that's being made. I would like to make the comment, and I suppose not least to the Director of Adult Community Services for consistency, is that I do raise, and I continue to raise, but I would actually like to say that in fact Councillor Noble, I think, missed out an important piece of capital that actually we engineered through our strategy by getting external capital being invested into this county of, I'm not sure the time scale, but of £60 million over a period of time into new care homes, with the objective of actually trying to make a saving of the inevitable maintenance we would have had to do if we hadn't disposed of those buildings. But I do come back to my annual plea, possibly to actually look from on high, which is probably one of the advantages of being scrutiny chairman rather than getting into the minutiae, is does the shape of the capital investment look right? And perhaps, having come from a business which had to look on a 10 to 15 year time scale, whether in fact we got the right trends, because they're not identified here, I know, but in fact perhaps we should consider the external capital that's being put into our county by other external commercial organisations, by the voluntary sector, which has an effect on our total picture. But there is no doubt, this last few years, our capital spend has had emphasis on our key priority of actually looking after our school children, making sure the school buildings are in their appropriate place, condition for raising the bar and raising the standards of our education. But it's interesting to note that project is maturing and is actually, in terms of capital spend, coming to a lower spend. But I do like to raise the question, in the challenges that we heard from Councillor Murray this morning in terms of the Better Care Fund, that we do look very carefully, that we consider our strategy not on a 2 to 3 year basis, or perhaps on a 5 year basis, of whether we're investing enough capital in the adult care services, bearing in mind the proportionality of that total revenue cost to the total the discretionary budget that we have, is that are we thinking about that in a long enough term to satisfy the opportunities that whole Better Care programme has to offer? So I make that point for consistency, Mr. Chairman, and I thank actually everybody for recognising the comments we've made from scrutiny. Thank you.
I think to speed things along, I'm going to take Councillor Gaylord's question next, and then we'll have an answer to that, and then take another 2 or 3.
This is for Councillor Noble. He said in his preamble that more people were involved in Friends Group than there has ever been in the history of Suffolk libraries. Now, this is a nice soundbite, but my recollection of events over the past 2 or 3 years has been that the people of Suffolk were told that you become involved in the process of your of library change, or your library will close, or you will not receive certain services. This seems to be a particularly nasty way of getting communities involved, and is not forgotten by the people of Suffolk. In the public consultation, 80% of respondents said that they did not want their libraries service divested out of it. They wanted a public run and funded library service. They did not want it divested. And they were totally ignored. Now my question, if I can get to that, is that this assertion that there are more people involved in Friends Group than has ever been in the history of Suffolk libraries is this. Could he give me the figures for volunteer involvement for the 3 years previous to August 2012? Volunteers have always been involved with running Suffolk libraries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll deal with Councillor Finch's question first. I think Councillor Murray.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On that.
Yes, it basically surrounds IT development, really, and the paramount support of our frontline staff. Well, fortunately, the development of IT, which is an amazingly large part of the integration process and communication with NHS and our voluntary colleagues, it's not currently funded from our capital budget. It's currently funded from a corporate budget and some NHS social capital funding. So, although it looks rather small, an awful lot more than that is going into the development of IT. Thank you.
Mr. Noble, do you want to pick up anything on Councillor Finch and Councillor Gaylor?
Well, I'll start with the comments made by Councillor Finch, and I agree with all that he was saying, particularly around the capital and investing in things like telecare and other things. It certainly was a hallmark of going around and talking with our communities and discussing. And what I found quite interesting was that when you talk to a community and you talk about the budget and you talk about if you value something differently and you wish us to spend in that area, then what area wouldn't you spend on? And you contrast that with Councillor Martin on the radio this morning, who rather disappointingly said that the Labour group wouldn't be putting forward an alternative budget, but will merely cherry pick a few political point scoring items. He did say that they try and do it from within the reserve, and I will give him that. But it's after 4 years of sitting there and waiting with bated breath for the Liberal alternate budget that never appeared, we can only hope it is more than one side A4, and that's all we can hope in that respect. But I certainly found when we went round with our communities, they completely bought the concept that there is a finite amount of money, and if you wish us to prioritise one thing, we cannot prioritise the other, and that was loud and clear to us. Now, moving on to this question about the library. So let's just establish some basic facts here. All the libraries are still open, aren't they? I just wanted to establish that one. And you are right that 80% of people wanted a publicly funded library service. And they still have a publicly funded library service. And that is done through the Independent Providence Society. Now, in terms of the number of people involved, volunteers have always played an important part in our library service. They have always played an important part. But when we had these conversations, I will go back to my own library, in my own village. When we were having these conversations, 1,000 people said that they valued their libraries, which was a little disappointing in as much as only 300 people registered to use the library. I called a public meeting. That public meeting had 106 people there. And from that meeting, I said, I want people to come forward and form a friends group and consider, could you take over the running of this library? How would you be involved? And today, in my village, they have a stall at the village fete. They arrange events for children, Halloween's night. There are 2 or 3 authors who come regularly to speak. None of this activity happened before we made the changes. So I don't have the specific figures on them, not to hand. I will try and find those for you. But I can assure you, across this county, from friends groups such as the one in my home village, to others that are far more involved in the day-to-day running, there are many different ways that volunteers, and there are far more volunteers involved, and they have taken our library service to being far more relevant to the people of Suffolk, and we have done that in the context of lowering the amount of money we spend on that service. That is an inconvenient truth for you. I fully accept that.
but that is the reality.
We've got Councillor Field next, and then Councillor Story.
Thank you. Just to stick to one subject, perhaps. We all recognise this is a difficult time. The government is protecting various lines of spend, particularly health and education, and therefore local government is one of the groups that suffer. And this is the response to that suffering. I find as a party we've always believed in issues like process re-engineering and preventative action. So when one looks at ACS and looks at a £10 million cut this year, compensating more than enough for demand and demography at 5 million and inflation at 3.6, one has to say if that's being done by improving processes and things genuinely, that's an acceptable move. It's regrettable that it's always difficult to measure the volume and quality of services that are being delivered, and as councillors I don't think we see that very clearly. And obviously we all suffer from the issue that the anecdotal feedback we get is that service quality is not being maintained, but that is anecdotal, it's not really evidence. The point in the budget that I suppose concerns me, and is the only question I will ask at the moment, I think, is when we look at the children and young people area. This again is an area that the government is choosing to support. It's not increasing the budget, but it's preserving it. And we are facing inflation of 1.8 million, other changes, whatever that is, a million, and we're taking 6.5 million out of that budget. And what are the quality of services we have? Well, we know we've gone from near the top of various educational league tables to pretty darn close to the bottom. So one might question whether this is the right place to be withdrawing a significant amount of money. I understand some of the withdrawal is in children's centres. Again, we believe in preventative care. You could argue that the earlier you get at children and improve their quality of education, that's sort of preventative care. It's certainly starting at the beginning, and this is an area we seem to be choosing to cut. So I think I'll leave it just at that. I won't rise to debate about previous budgets. I was always taught that one should not allow people to ignore you so you lose your sense of proportion.
I have a feeling some of your colleagues might not be so restrained, but we will see. I've got Councillor Story next, and then we'll have the answers then. Johnny, you're still on.
There we go. It's all right. I'm there. Many thanks to Colin for his kind words. My boots are getting smaller every day, and I'm not sure whether that's my diet or something else, but he certainly has his feet under the table. Suffolk County Council is very lucky. Its officers and staff have generally taken on board the message that we have to do things differently to make savings. As one lady used to say, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always had, or something like that. There are significant changes to the way that Suffolk County Council works in delivering services, and also the way that we react with other members of our community, whether that's the voluntary sector or just ordinary members of our constituencies. But we should not forget back office workers, those that work in the background to support the organisation, including councillors. Back office do not get the credit that they deserve. They are the oil that keep the other cogs going, and they are our hidden gems. And I would particularly point out the finance, HR and ICT teams, but particularly the finance team with Jeff and all of his workers, because they really are exceptional in the way that they put together the budget. Suffolk County Council continues to make a difference to the lives of the people of Suffolk. It is a strange coincidence that the reduction in reserves is almost equal to the amount that we've put into broadband, and I think it's a measure of the difference that we can make that we look to make investments in the future of the lives of the people of Suffolk in things like broadband and in the local economy, and I think that's very much the way that we should be going. Thank you.
I would say here to that. Right, Councillor Chambers, would you like to just comment on Councillor Field's question?
Okay. I'd just like to start by saying that in terms of the Children's Centre, address that part of your question first. And I think I probably already outlined previously that the majority of the saving within that is actually an underspend that we currently have within children's centres, and the remaining £500,000 will then be delivered through management restructuring of the service. Looking beyond that, we will then undertake consultation throughout the service and with the users of that service. It is really important to me, and I know every other member here, that actually what we're doing is delivering the right services to the right people at the right time. And we need to make sure that the children's centres are working and getting as many families through the door and working with those families as early and as quickly as possible. So I'm absolutely committed to carrying out the consultation process that we need to do moving forward. And I'm also confident that we can deliver a better service by looking at how that service is structured at the moment, and that might be in the sense that some of the buildings might not be the best buildings to deliver those services, and they might be delivered in different buildings, in different ways, in conjunction with other, and we've already talked about working with the voluntary sector, so how we can actually work with the voluntary sector better to deliver better services and make sure that our frontline officers are protected in terms of delivering those services on the ground and not having our money held up in some cases in the county, expensive buildings. So there is a significant piece of work that we've embarked on around that to make sure that we can get absolutely best value for money for the families out of this. Looking towards the comments that you've made in terms of education, I think, I'm the first person, along with Cabinet, to stand up and say that we're not where we want to be, and that the leader has clearly laid out that education is our number one priority, and I'm absolutely committed to working on that and achieving as much as possible. What I would like to reflect on is the fact that we have made a significant investment both in raising the bar and in our manifesto pledge towards apprenticeships, and that's about 3.9 million, so it's about £4 million that we're actually investing. So the savings that are identified here are very much about our changing relationship with schools, recognising the way that we need to do work with our schools differently, and our delivery mechanism for raising the bar is absolutely steadfast, and will make sure that it has the resources that it needs to deliver our ambitions around that, which I think is clearly reflected in terms of, if you look at the report on the, I can't find it now, paragraph 56, and the transformational work that has been identified right across the county in all directorates. There are two very clear ones there for CYP, the operating model, and about working more effectively with families, and also the Raising the Bar programme. So we are absolutely clear in terms of our vision and pace of work that needs to be done.
Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to the comments from Councillor Story, I can only echo those in terms of our officers. I spoke in my opening words about the cultural change here, and there is no doubt that when you go around this country, you go to different forums, you go to conferences, Suffolk is genuinely held up in the way in which we have gone about our business. It is generally held up as a shining example of how to take money out of the system and yet continue to deliver frontline services. When you think of the complex nature of our business today, we have a couple of wholly owned companies in Concertus and Eastern Facility Management. We have a joint venture company in Suffolk North around our buses. We have pure contracts, such as the one we've let to Kia UK. And then you look at our mutualisation, where our own staff have gone out and formed their own companies to deliver services from organisations such as Sensing Change, Realise Futures. These go forth and are hailed nationally at the recent, well, not that recent, but in October, the National Adult and Children's Conference. There is the Cabinet Office, and there is Sensing Change, being hailed up as an example about how to lower your costs, how to take costs out, and still deliver services. And I think it doesn't just behold of the County Council. It was very marked last week. I went to a meeting and we were in Hertfordshire and we were looking at the local government structure in Hertfordshire. And Hertfordshire has 10 district councils and there is no sharing amongst them. They haven't joined services. They haven't. We sit in West Suffolk House and the officers here are part of West Suffolk, delivering services to St Edmundsbury Borough Council and to Forest Heath District Council. And across Suffolk we have got 6 councils sharing officer teams. And across this country there are only 40 councils doing that. So across Suffolk there is really, really good practice of taking this challenge of an environment where there is less money and actually saying, if we're going to protect frontline services, we need to do these things differently. And we've taken that and we're going out and we are delivering that. And that is a testament to our officers. Because we set the policy, we set the agendas, they have to implement it. And I have to say, when you look back in those cabinet papers going back 10, 12 years, and you look through some of the activities and the way in which this is a totally different organisation to the one that existed there, and is extremely efficient at delivering services. But for all that, we don't rest on our laurels, and there is still great challenge ahead.
And I think the only thing I would add to that, which I'm very proud to be able to announce to you again, following last year, we have been shortlisted as the most improved council of the year again. And I think that says an awful lot that our peers are very much valuing the contribution that Suffolk County Council is making in the work that we are doing in local government. And I think reiterates everything that Councillor Noble has said there. Right, I'm going to take the next 2 questions. I've got Councillor Gage next, and then Councillor Otten. Following that, I've got 4 more questioners. Are there any other questions anyone wants to ask? No. Okay, we'll draw the line on that. Councillor Gage first, then Councillor Otten.
Thank you, Chairman. I did have just the one question, but if I may, I have a challenge to the comments from Councillor Noble and Councillor Hoffensberg about libraries, which I'd want to make first and then move on to my main point. With regard to libraries, and following on from my colleague Councillor Gaillard's comments, whilst it is true that actual libraries have not closed, mobile library services in Ipswich have been discontinued. And that's perhaps a strange thing to say when you look on the council's website to see that there is something called the Ipswich Mobile Service Round. The strange thing being that the one place it doesn't call in is Ipswich. Can I just point that out to you? Because when you talk about cuts to services, you need to be really clear on what has happened. And in Ipswich, we have had a cut in our library service. So I think it is misleading for you to continue to say that those services have not been cut. Certainly for myself, speaking for Rushmere Division, it has a particular impact in that we do not have an actual library. So when the services were cut with little or no notice in library service, residents of Rushmere Ipswich were quick to inform me that they now had a significant journey to find themselves the nearest library, which would be the Central Library, Northgate Street, Ipswich, many of whom are unable to travel long distance themselves. They relied upon the mobile service, much as they do elsewhere across Suffolk, I'm sure, but it's something that they've lost. And I'm talking about a population of around about 7,000, quite a significant cut in one division alone in Ipswich. So I'd just like to make that point. If I may now, Chairman, move on to my main point.
Before you do, we seem to have an awful lot of feedback on this at the moment. I am just wondering if it's because you're speaking too closely. So let's just try and experiment by just moving slightly further away.
Then.
And then we can hear you more clearly then.
Good, okay. I'd like to move on to the main thrust of the cutbacks that we see in this budget and the previous budgets, which is often around outsourcing and privatisation.
and refer that to Councillor Colin Noble and indeed possibly to Councillor Graham Newman, because I want to talk about the impact that has had on the highway service, and in particular the loss of funding for services in Ipswich. We are in a situation now where we have a predominantly privatised highway service, and yet in Ipswich councillors do not have access to a budget to enable them to carry out any of the or investigate some of the issues that they have brought to their attention by constituents. I have a budget of £8,000 a year, which is the local highway budget, and is listed on page 7 of Annex E as the local highways budget. We all have that amount. What I'm shocked to find is that that budget also now has to fund the privatised design service, and I am now having to spend most of my budget in just asking Keir May Gurney to carry out some design work for me before we even get to finding out what the schemes may or may not cost. That's the true impact of privatisation here in Suffolk, and something to be aware of. So when we talk about there being no cuts to frontline service, I certainly have seen a cutback in that respect, and would perhaps suggest that something which the public may not be aware of. The public have made great reference in the comments come back from the public consultation that what they really want to see is improvements to roads and highways, but what we don't really have is a highways budget to carry out those improvements. So I would ask Graham Newman perhaps if he could look at that.
Another question. Otten next, and then we'll move to the answers.
Thank you very much. As much as we would be surprised if Councillor Newman didn't mention 18%, I'm sure. Sorry? Oh, I do beg your pardon. Sorry, I do have to have some new glasses.
Is that your question?
Oh, they were talking. I thought you said anyway, I'll carry on. He would obviously be surprised if I didn't mention the fact that the obviously Liberal Democrat initiative in government on the pupil premium, which has been raised again this year for support for our most vulnerable pupils. However, when I look at the papers in front of me in your budget book, I would just like you, if you could, explain to me why on the orange page 4 you have a sum there of 290,740, and yet on page 1 of the white papers there is a significant different sum there of 343 down to 328. Perhaps you could explain that to me. I think if any member of the public, of a school, a head teacher, looking at these papers, they would be somewhat confused. I am disappointed that you are cutting the school improvement service when you've just seen at the start of this meeting a recommendation from the Education Scrutiny Committee to ensure adequate resources to enable the learning improvement service to support schools, so particularly for children at risk. So I really would challenge you to come and explain to me why you're doing that. I'm also disappointed that you are proposing to cut the children's centres and the youth offending service, something which I believe is important in order to get young people back into the mainstream of education. I'm not going to go into details of certainly other members have on the libraries, but I would like to point out that when you handed the libraries over to the IPS, the community groups were told that they would have to find considerable sums of money on a year-by-year basis. The IPS then managed to pull back on that, but I did warn them at the time that this may not happen year on year, and I would like to know if, as a result of the reduction that you're putting forward this year, whether the IPS will now have to go back to the library groups asking for either the original or a greater contribution. And just finally, Councillor Noble, I would just like to ask, on page 2 of appendix, I think it's appendix 1, on the tax base, why is St Edmundsbury, and I apologise to St Edmundsbury as we are sitting in their rather splendid council chamber, why they have a deficit there of £332,949.
We first of all must deal with the question from Councillor Gage, which I think, Councillor Newman, do you want to kick off, and then I'm going to invite Councillor Newman then to pick up that, and then Councillor Osborne. Right, Councillor Newman first.
Thank you, Chairman. The issue referred to by Councillor Gage got absolutely nothing to do with the fact that KMG are now our highways provider. That, in fact, is a policy decision by this authority that the design work for any new scheme should actually be costed and part of that scheme, rather than hidden in the area highways office, which in any event are under huge pressure. And many people in here have referred to difficulties they've had in dealing with their local highways office. This is one way of offloading that, that's putting that design work out with a job as a whole. And actually I think that's the right way for accounting for the work we've done, and reflects the fact that one of the things that we're doing going forward is considerably improving financial control over the entire highways maintenance operation.
Okay, Councillor Noble.
Okay, I'll pick up the specifics, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're going quite fast there, and I've just got to be very... I think you're referring to page 4, and you're referring to the £280,000 figure there, yes? 290,740?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then you're referring to page 1 of Annex F,
Yeah.
and the line of dedicated schools grant of 328,591,000, yes?
Yeah, plus the pupil premium.
Yeah, which is the difference betwixt the two, and what is the difference made up of? Okay, Jeff, do you want to just go through what the difference is made up of?
Thank you. If I can, the DSG obviously funds schools, and that 290 million is for schools, but it also funds other mainstream services. And if I could refer you to page 6 on those Annex C2C, there's some more detail we've put in on that page, which shows how the DSG and other funding is utilised. And if you look at the grant income columns there, we've got early years and service deliveries, special educational needs, and that is also funded from the DSG. So the whole of the DSG is 328 million, and part of that is the other part of the funding. So it's 290 million down to schools, and there's additional funding there that's going to those activities. I think those are the main differences. I mean, if you look at the Annex F, which you're referring to, there's also pupil premium on there and sixth form funding, which is also taken account of in this other table.
Looking to Councillor Gage, if you felt you had an answer fully in your question. Would you like to pick up Councillor Gage's question as well?
So picking up the specifics of outsourcing and privatisation, is that the bit you're asking me about? Okay. I do fully accept that at a philosophical level you believe that only councils can actually deliver a range of services. But I'm sorry, I don't agree. And the evidence disagrees with you as well. And the way in which we're protecting services is because in many areas we've issued contracts, because we've formed mutuals, because our staff have gone out and actually delivering services. So at a fundamental philosophical level, we actually believe in outsourcing. We believe in mutualisation. I know you love that word, privatisation. I like the word mutualisation because it is about our own staff going out and delivering services. And I have to say, I personally am of the opinion, and certainly in terms of the Moripole and what people think of us, I think we are delivering on those services. And when you go and talk to Sensing Change, and you go and talk to Realise Futures, and you talk to the teams in Concertus, and you talk to the teams in the FMS, the change in how they view the delivery of services and how they view residents is markedly different. And they are able, and they are delivering more service for less money. Go and talk to them. Go and actually sit down with them and talk to them about what they're doing and how they're developing their services. They are doing those very things.
Okay. Councillor Brown, you indicated earlier you wanted to ask a question. You're next. Do you want to ask a question?
I don't think I had any more questions answered.
Okay. Right. Well, we'll come back to the questions that haven't been answered. You had...
Councillor Channing's already answered it.
So you're fine. So you don't need... Okay, right. Right. So, Councillor Gage wants to come back, and it sounds as if Councillor Alton wants to come back. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I just want to come back on your point, Councillor Noble, and I know we sit at literally opposite sides of the chamber on this, but actually I want to talk to you from a practical perspective, irrespective of what we think in our hearts should or shouldn't be happening. In terms of highways, the reality is that we used to have a directly employed staff who could respond to the residents' needs. And I have to talk specifically of Ipswich because that's where at the moment my most recent examples are. We now have a situation where I have a backlog myself personally and so do my fellow Labour councillors for Ipswich in schemes which they want to have delivered in Ipswich. We neither have the budget or any indication that there could ever be a budget for some of these schemes, which are quite reasonable. I'm talking about health and safety, road safety issues. But more than that, we do not have the staff resources because predominantly most of the experienced staff have been outsourced, or whatever you want to call it, to Care MG. They've been tupied out of the organisation. We have to pay for their time back if we want anything. Of the £8,000 that I have at my disposal for local highways budget, I'm spending 2.5 of it just for their time to talk to me. That's without any opportunity to spend any money on the measures that are quite reasonably brought to my attention. My fellow councillors have the same problem. So don't talk to me about it being improved service or efficiency savings, because that is not the reality here.
Okay, and very briefly, Councillor Alton, please.
It was a question on the sum to the IPS and also about St Edmunds Group Borough Council.
Do you want to pick up there first, Councillor Noble, and then if there's anything Councillor Newman wants to give in response to Councillor Gage's question, then fine. Go on then, and then that gives Noble, Councillor Noble.
I'll just come back to what I said previously, Chairman. You know, the issue that Sandra Gage is raising is not about the fact that highway services have been outsourced to Care MG at all. It's about a policy decision taken by us that each design work for every project will be costed as part of the project and will not be just hidden in the overall cost of running the area highways office. The reason for that is the area highways offices are very stretched and are not always able to respond as fast as we want them to. So therefore it's true that design work that is being done has got to be costed, and indeed would need to be in terms of proper transaction as the cost of any particular job. So it's not fair to disguise those costs as part of a scheme. I mean, you can make an argument as to whether £8,000 is enough or not, and that can perhaps be looked at. But the fact of the matter is, the schemes, the decision to have the schemes costed in terms of both developing a scheme and delivering it was something taken by this council and has nothing to do with privatisation as such.
So Noble then, please.
I'll just yield to Councillor Hoffensberger on this specific point.
Thank you. Your question over the Friends groups and increase in their contribution to the IPS contract. Well, no, we won't be asking them for any more money. The savings that have been made is, with regards to the library services is through a reduction in the book stock, which is in line with the more current trend for e-books, for example, and also the bringing in of the services such as back office services such as IT and HR into the Suffolk libraries has allowed a reduction in savings there. But with regards to actually the fundraising from the Friends Group, I've been really impressed at how they've embraced the flexibility that has been given to them through the fundraising, which has allowed them to expand their activities. And as Councillor Noble reiterated in his opening, it now means our services actually being increased, in activities that our libraries are doing has actually been increased through allowing them the flexibility to fundraise and put on extra activities. So long may that continue.
So I'll pick up Councillor Hodgson's and then I'll return to Councillor Gage's points. In terms of the collection, in essence, that is not our figure. That is St Edmundsbury's figure, so that they effectively tell us what they think they will collect, and then that is a reflection of their position. It is more complicated. I'm just going to bring Jeff in because I think it's a useful point to talk about how we get this money, because we use this term council tax, and actually there are mechanics involved in this about how that money flows, and I think it's just useful for all of us just to have that from Jeff.
Okay, thank you. As Councillor Noble has said, the council tax basis for council tax and the surpluses do come from the district and borough treasurers. They obviously take an assessment on what they believe they can collect. They take a view on losses on collection, etc. They also obviously make an estimate of how many new properties are coming on stream. So we get a tax base increase, and in that Annex 1 that you're referring to, you'll see that 13% change from 13-14. There has been some bigger changes in tax base increases compared with some other authorities. And the St Edmundsbury one, it may well have been in 13-14 that their assumptions on tax base growth has not come through as fast as they anticipated. And that's probably a reflection in the smaller change in the tax base. But over the period of, in different years, if we looked at that column of tax base, tax surplus or deficits, we will have seen from different authorities pluses and minuses each year. Unfortunately, overall, we've generally ended up with a positive. This year, the positive is somewhat higher than we've had more recently. But I think that again reflects probably their cautiousness in 12-13, because that was the year when the 13-14, when the year of the changes to council tax benefit took place, where more poor people, if I can put it that way, were asked to pay council tax, and it wasn't always clear whether they would collect all that money. So this can fluctuate, but effectively those numbers do come from the boroughs and districts. Thank you.
I'm going to move on to the final three questions as I've got them. I've got Councillor Barker next, then Councillor Lockington, and then Councillor Hudson. I've not missed anybody else out, have I? No. Okay. Councillor Barker first, then, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is to Councillor Lisa Chambers. Making every intervention count is a noble phrase, I'm sure, on all counts, especially in the light of last week's GCSE figures, which shows that Suffolk's results are still below that of 2011. And I'm sure Councillor Noble enjoys looking at figures from the past. So those figures are below the figures of 2011, despite an improvement in 2013. So it does appear odd to me and to the group on this side to cut the Learning Improvement Service by £500,000, bearing in mind the Ofsted very critical report of last autumn, in which they looked to Suffolk to improve educational opportunities. And if we think back to the health intervention comments, life chances are blighted and children's health care for the future are blighted if they do not start off with good educational qualifications, which are at the root of young people's futures. So I just wondered if Councillor Noble had been listening. He was talking about consultation and listening to groups. I wondered if he'd listened to Ofsted's comments and how they say Suffolk can improve itself. The second question is about reserves of £5 million in the SOR budget on page 90. Surely some of that could be used to improve the legacy of SOR, particularly in my division at Colville School, where the traffic congestion
partly as the result of SOR, has caused safeguarding issues, and I believe also as a legacy of SOR, in the northern part of Lowestoft, there are other issues to do with another school where visitors to that school have major problems because of SOR and the openness of the site. So, two questions there. One on how can you make every intervention count to improve GCSEs? And secondly, how to use the reserves far more creatively. Thank you.
I'm going to take all the final questions.
I think I yield the floor to Councillor Chambers for that one, because it's very much an education.
Yeah, don't worry, we'll be right, Councillor Lockington, then finally Councillor Hudson, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Noble, you have been doing some research and looking back in history. Now, I came on the council in 2001, so I maybe have a bit of benefit of history which you may not have. But in your looking back to sort of about 2000 on budget papers and so on, what did you find of copies of the Tory proposal for budgets during these years? It would be really interesting to know, and how many sheets of paper did they run to?
Thank you for that. Finally, Councillor Hudson, please.
I'm actually referring to paragraph 75, the apprenticeship reserve. I am pleased that a proposed earmarked £1.5 million reserve has been established to fund a new local apprenticeship service. And it goes on to say this will include the delivery of a series of targeted marketing campaigns to promote the importance of apprenticeships. And the question I would like to ask is, could you, I think this question is to Councillor Smith, could you expand on that service?
I'm going to invite Councillor Chambers to pick up on the questions from Councillor Barker, and then also the final one there on apprenticeships, and then Councillor Noble can then wrap up with the other points that were made, particularly from Councillor Lockington.
Okay, Councillor Barker, I'd like to go back to your question in terms of raising the bar and raising levels of attainment, and I won't reiterate what I've already said around that, but I would like to talk a little bit about the Learning Partnership, and I know you'll be keen to hear about this. The Learning Partnership has come from the Raising the Bar Programme Board, and we actually are working very closely with one particular head teacher who has engaged with I would say probably a fair number, if not all of the head teachers across Suffolk. I can certainly say that we have a definite figure of 250 head teachers that Madeline Vigar, the teacher that we're working closely with on this, who also sits on the programme board. She'll be coming back to present to Deborah, Sue and myself very shortly in terms of what the head teacher's vision of what the Learning Partnership will be. And this will very much reflect the changing culture that I've already referred to in education, the changing relationship, and the way that we can work much better and much more proactively with our schools in terms of raising attainment. And I think it's really important that as we move forward, we're refocusing and remodelling the way in which we invest our money in the Learning and Improvement Service to make sure that we're getting absolutely to the core principles of that in raising attainment of our pupils. We've made a significant investment, as I've already said, in terms of raising the bar and our apprenticeship scheme in the county, £3.9 million, and absolutely committed to seeing that being driven forward and improvement taking place. Moving on to your comments around Colton Colville, and I will take us back to the meeting that we had in Colton Colville with Councillor Newman, Sandra Gage, Councillor Gage, and the discussion that we had, and we very much reflected at the time on the fact that it is not an isolated case in terms of traffic congestion, and the concerted effort that we make both within Councillor Newman's section and in my portfolio in terms of making that transition from parents from relying on the car to making sure that they're finding the most sustainable ways to get to their schools. And we're working very closely with Carlton Coalfield to find solutions, as you know, and a feasibility study to find long-term solutions to the problems. But these problems can be replicated across the county, and this work is nowhere near finished and something that we will continue to drive forward as the pressure for parking spaces increases around schools. But I very much take on board the comments that you've said in terms of how important this is to schools and how important it is to safeguarding. As you know, we are being very proactive about that. I'd just actually like to comment a little bit about just going back to your first point and the investment made in terms of across all phases in raising education. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about some work that I'm doing in Newmarket through and Councillor Nobles already mentioned about the Newmarket Vision Group. One of the themes of work that we have through the Newmarket Vision Group is an education theme, which is pulling together all of the primary schools, secondary schools, businesses, local authorities, district council, town council, county council, to talk about what our vision is and implementing raising the bar very much on the ground. And the thing that really struck me that came out of our delivery group session there was the fact that the aspiration and the desire to see that it's from 0 to 99 in terms of our aspirations for learning and how we want to see not just concentrating on the GCSE results, but actually you're taking children as soon as they're born in terms of all the way through your life, you're building up a learning culture. So I'm really excited about the piece of work that we're doing in Newmarket, and I really hope that other localities will embrace this work and want to engage in setting up very much localised groups that can deliver raising the bar in such a proactive way. Would you want me to go on to Councillor Hudson's? Councillor Hudson, I really want to refer you to the Cabinet paper that went to Cabinet. I believe you were there at the most recent Cabinet session where we had the paper on apprenticeships and the investment of 1.5 million. I think it would be a bit much for me now to go into the ins and outs of the aspirations in terms of delivery of that, but the paper does clearly lay out how we intend to spend that investment in Suffolk and work very closely with businesses in terms of a brokerage and matchmaking young people with businesses to make sure that we're finding sustainable posts both for the business and for the young person, to make sure we're giving the right advice and getting the right opportunities for young people, along with the city deal, yes, but our investment was pan-Suffolk. Yeah.
Right, Councillor Noble.
Thank you. If you'll indulge me, Mr. Chairman, I do want to pick up on the point that Councillor Gage made, because we didn't quite finish that exchange, and I think it would be quite useful to finish that one. One of the comments you made, which I found absolutely fascinating, was through your budget now, essentially because the contract has been privatised, as you say it, I would say we have a partner now who's delivering efficiencies and we've taken money out of the contract yet still delivering the service we always did. You made a comment about pay for their time back, which I found absolutely fascinating. Essentially, we've always paid for their time because we employed them. And the fact that you didn't actually have to account for that in your locality highway budget is somewhat irrelevant to the fact that we still had to pay for them. And the reality now is the cost is much purer. Now, that is a budgetary issue. That is an issue around how much budget you have. And as we have tried throughout the course of this debate, make the point that if you want more budget, you have to say where we won't be spending money. It is the requirement, because if you want more budget and are unprepared to say where you want, one can only assume you wish to put the council tax up. That's all I can assume, because everything has to be paid for from somewhere. And that is the reality. So I think, I personally would say, you were slightly muddling two issues to make a point, and I don't think those two issues are the same. Now, coming on to Councillor Lockington, as you say, You have been on this council longer than I, and therefore you know the history. Of course, I also know an element of the history, and earlier today, Councillor Spicer was talking about the budget proposals of the Conservatives in opposition. My understanding is that apart from 1 year, we did actually propose alternate budgets. But in terms of the history, I do long remember the history, because actually the very thing that got me involved in politics was my council tax bill landing on my doorstep, where 1 year I just could not believe that the county council was putting the council tax up by 11.9%. I was even more flabbergasted the following year that following that insult you decided to put it up by 18.5%. And I said at that time, enough was enough. This can't be right. This is absolutely ridiculous. And so I do remember the history, and that is why you're in opposition, and that is why we are in control of this county council, because we are delivering for the good people of Suffolk. We're delivering for the hard-working families who are trying to balance their bills at their kitchen table, and they can rely on us to deliver 0% council tax and deliver services to the most vulnerable in our society. So I long remember the history.
I think that's the best answer you're going to get. Save it. This is but the warm-up for the 13th of February, so there you go. Now, I'm just going to bring in Councillor Newman, who I think can give some specific detail about the Carlton Colburn issue, and then I think we do need to then move to conclusion.
I think the point I wanted to make, Mr. Chairman, was purely that, we have parking problems at all 300 plus schools that we've got. It's not fair to say that we've got a problem with parking because the school's been through schools organisation review. Now, I do accept that the issues at Carlton Colville are particularly virulent. If you listen to the local residents, and I have been to public meetings at that school, they will tell you those problems have been there since the school opened in the late 1970s. And in fact, we only converted it to a primary school back in 2011. So the problem is very long-standing, and I have got the commitment of the director to find funds, along with other funding sources, to address those issues. It won't be around building parking spaces all over a school playing field, but we will do some things which make it easier for children to get to school by alternative means than the car. And that's what's going on. We've got people coming from shorter and shorter distances to school in cars. It's not doing the children any good at all. That's why we've got a public health issue over obesity. We have got to face that problem down and not listen to every populist whinge about I can't get my car near enough to the school.
Right. On that positive note, I'm going to move to a vote. Thank you very much indeed for your comments, and it's been very valuable, I think, to have the questions and the comebacks on those as well, because it allows us to really go into detail on this. As I said earlier, this is but the warm-up for the main event, which will be on the 13th of February. So, do come along to that. Paul's smiling already. He can't wait. Right, we've got the recommendations, which you'll find on page 71 to 72 of the report. I'm going to ask Cabinet if you are happy to accept. I hope that you are, after all of that. All agreed? Thank you very much indeed. You will be relieved to know there are no urgent items of business. The next date of the Cabinet meeting will be the 25th of February 2014 in the King Edmund Chamber in Dever House in Ipswich. I close the meeting and I understand the canteen is open until 2 o'clock, so you'll be able to get some lunch. Thank you very much indeed.